Hi, everybody. Welcome to the WVHuddle.com Prep Football Podcast. First episode of the 2015 season. This is the third year we've been doing this. Doing a little different this year. We've got sound and video going, so some of you may be seeing our faces for the first time, and I apologize for our ugly mugs. I am Tom Bragg, joined by Gazette Mail Assistant Sports Editor Derek Taylor. Some new titles going around with the merger coming in. Like I said, we're doing things a little bit different this year. We've got the video and sound going on. We've got our lovely, should we call you our engineer, Marcus Constantino, handling all the technical aspects of things, and we are very grateful for that. Glad to have Marcus aboard. What we're going to do, we're just going to jump right in. We'll look at the games from the first week, and Derek can't start without the defending AAA state champions, Capital Cougars, 50-0 over the Riverside Warriors. Riverside's got a new coach this year in Zach Davis, very successful defensive coordinator coming out of the state of Georgia. Probably not the start that he would have liked, but I don't think anybody in the state would have liked to have opened with Capital this year. Capital, of course, lost some guys. They lost the Kennedy Award winner, Kayshawn Haley, guys like Jordan Kenny, Tyrell Davis, but they've got a ton back, and got to start with that quarterback, Tyree Pratt. Derek, we were both at the game Thursday night. What did you think about the Cougars' opening statement?
Well, as I wrote the next day or whatever, the biggest thing that stood out to me was the fact that this is now Tyree Pratt's team. No question about it. Everything finally focuses around him. He engineers everything. He has been doing that. This is his fourth year as a starting quarterback, but he's always had Kayshawn Haley. Excuse me.
You all right?
Yeah. Good time for get some in my throat.
Get you a drink.
Yeah. Jordan Kenny on the outside. They're both gone. But what I really liked seeing is his decision making. I think is quicker. I think he's making better reads of secondary, and he's still able to create with his legs as well as his arm. And he's got two receivers now in the freshman Kerry Martin and senior Miguel Crunchy Bays, who are right there at top level receivers, as good as anybody in the state. And I mean.
Yeah, that's saying a lot. Kerry Martin, that was his first high school game. We heard a lot about him and his, just outstanding athletic career in middle school at Horace Mann in Kanawha City. But you were kind of interested to see, okay, how's he going to transition to the high school game? And it seems like he didn't miss a beat.
No, not at all. And I'm always hesitant, about hearing how great somebody is in middle school or anything. I really try not to buy into too much of that. But this kid's already, I think 6'3", and about 175, 180.
Yeah, he looks the part.
Yeah, he really does. Mm-hmm. And, he was coming up as a quarterback. And obviously Pratt's there, so they've moved him to wide out, and he's picked it up, very quickly and become, a good deep threat for them. And, it clears up the middle for Crunchy Bays, and that's what they're going with. And John Carpenter told me the week before the opener that, with the personnel they have this year, with Haley gone and Silas Nazario being a little bit, not a little bit, a good bit smaller than Kayshawn Haley was, they're going to throw the ball more. Expect a lot of, passing out of Capital.
I was going to mention Silas Nazario. We got 5 minutes into talking about Capital, and we hadn't talked about him yet. He's one of the quickest running backs in the state. I hesitate to say that he's one of the best running backs, but he's amongst that group of you guys like Dylan Tonkery from Bridgeport that you can hand him the ball and good things are going to happen. Defensive side of the ball, though, Capital puts up the goose egg against Riverside. I know people say, oh, it's Riverside, and we talked about this a little bit on the sideline toward the end of that game, maybe in the fourth quarter, just about how in years past that game could have been 100-0 with the way the Riverside teams have played. They didn't quit. They didn't lay down at any point in that game. I know they didn't score any points and they gave up 50, but that was maybe the best effort I've seen out of a Riverside team in a long time.
I really liked that. I mean, not only that, we commented, a couple of us who were watching the game, coverage-wise, that, Tyree Pratt made a lot of plays with his legs and rolling out. He was forced to do that a lot, too.
Yeah, they were getting pressure.
Riverside's interior lines are much better this year, I think, than they've been in the past several years. As you said, they did not quit. And I know that it sounds so cliche, but it actually is so important. Some cliches are cliches because, there's value to them. I don't think Riverside's going to experience anything like they did last year when they went 0-10. I don't think they're a 500 team this year, but I think there's at least 2 or 3 wins on that schedule that they're going to come out of with.
We'll move on to our next game. Another Thursday night game that we covered for WVHuddle.com and the Charleston Gazette-Mail. Bridgeport at Buchanan Upshur, defending AA champion Indians 50. Bucks finished with 13 points. That one, too, I thought that one might be a little bit closer because sometimes Bridgeport, as good as they are, they don't necessarily light up a scoreboard. They will just smother teams to death. 50 points, that was very, very impressive coming out of Bridgeport.
Yeah, they seem to have, I don't know what the score by quarters was, but
I believe it was close.
It might have been 50 to nothing at one point. I'm not quite sure. I think it was. Yeah. Look, between Dylan Tonkery and Dante Bonamico in the backfield, they're going to be able to, always have an option there for somebody to have a big game. And that's what happened with them last year. Dylan Tonkery, I don't think, had 1,000 yards rushing before the playoffs began last year. And then he had a huge playoff year.
He might have had 1,000 yards in the playoffs last year.
And, he comes home for Christmas with a WVU offer, Bridgeport is always going to, restock on the line. They're always going to be able to run the ball. They always have been able to, and that's not going to stop. I was a little bit surprised by 50 right off the bat, but, BU's not a bad team.
No,
they made the playoffs in AAA last year, and they're probably a playoff team this year. Marcus Lofton won the Carl Lee Award last year as the best defensive back in the state. He's back as a senior. They've got another solid defensive back who's apologetically here. His name escapes me right now, but I know that they've got another, top-level D back, and Bridgeport just mauled them.
Yeah, that defensive secondary from Buchanan,
they probably made a lot of tackles.
Yeah, the tackle stats were probably up there. Well, moving on from Thursday, and we'll get into Friday's games, and these aren't in order of importance or anything. We've got an alphabetical list, so we'll just go down through the ones we have highlighted. Start out, Cabell Midland 41, Spring Valley 6, down in Wayne County. The Knights have turned into a perennial contender to get to Wheeling every year under Coach Luke Salmons, former Marshall player, an excellent coach in high school in Kentucky before he ended up in Ona at Cabell Midland. Spring Valley's so up and down. It seems like every other year Spring Valley is amongst those teams that you think, oh man, they might be able to make a run. Well, that was last year. Yeah. They lost a lot of guys. Top level guys going to Division I schools. Marshall, Charlotte, had several guys, particularly linemen, going around. This doesn't seem like it's one of those years for Spring Valley. The other side of that, Cabell Midland seems like they're picking up right where they left off. They like to run the ball, and they do it well.
Yeah, Caperton Humphrey, the running back at Cabell Midland.
Sounds like he should be a senator.
Yeah, he really does, yeah. I think he's going to be one of those guys that's among the top 4 or 5 rushers in AAA this year. And Midland does the thing with everybody specializes on playing one side of the ball or the other. They don't play many guys two ways. Mm-hmm. This game, I think, was a little bit of showed that a little bit what that does, because this was close for a while.
Yeah,
and they wore down Spring Valley and pulled away. Spring Valley is really young, like you said. I think they've got 8 underclassmen starting on one side of the ball and maybe 9 on the other. Not a lot of experience. Tyler Brown also left, and he's at Robert Morris. He their quarterback from last year, rolled up, close to 3,000 yards total. They've got a lot of things to replace. They'll be all right. I just think Spring Valley is one of those cyclical powers that they get to a point and then they've got to reset a little bit and come back.
And they've got a great coach in Brad Dingus.
Oh yeah.
If he was at, I don't want to say a bigger school, Spring Valley's a big school, but if he was at one of those schools that every class has 7 or 8 kids that are talented, can go play college ball, then he'd be mentioned amongst the best coaches in the state every year. Spring Valley, it's just not the reality, but I think as long as he's there, they're not ever going to be bad. There's just going to be some years that are better than others. Next game we'll get into, Fairmont Senior 24, Robert C. Byrd 13. Matchup of AA teams in the Big Ten in North Central West Virginia. Up at East West Stadium, one of my old stomping grounds when I worked at the Fairmont paper, and one of your favorite stadiums, I say, with my tongue firmly planted in my cheek. Not real sure what to make of this game. I thought Fairmont jumped out on Robert C. Byrd. I don't think that Byrd had any positive yards in the first half, and that was a little surprising to me. Fairmont, I thought, might be a little more speed and finesse oriented. I thought if they were going to win this game, they would end up blowing the doors off of Byrd, and it might be a high-scoring game. Not the case, though. 24-13, it's that defense from Fairmont. That might be something to mark down and remember for AA teams. Excuse me, going forward from here.
Yeah. Yeah, this is another one that was kind of slow to develop, it seemed. The offenses weren't really clicking at all early on in that, from what I followed from our writer Ryan Pritt, who was covering this game. Bird, lost Bruce Carey. He went ahead and retired after last season. And now Brian Fisher's coaching Bird again, which is, a guy who was coaching Bird for the bulk of the 2000s.
When I was in high school, Brian Fisher, Jimbo Fisher's little brother, the Florida State head coach, and Brian Fisher was actually the offensive coordinator at Fairmont State when I was working up there. So I know Brian a little bit. Yeah.
So I think what we might be seeing, Brian Fisher's a pass-happy guy.
Oh, yeah.
He likes to spread the ball out and throw the ball a lot. And, they're not coming from that, being under Bruce Carey for the last couple of years. It might take a little while for that offense to gel in the regular season. But, this was what we called the Gazette Mail poll, statewide game of the week this week. And they're both ranked right there in the middle of the pack in the preseason poll in AA. It was the best matchup that we saw. And it turned out with a 11-point spread among the ranked teams. That was one of the closer games we had.
There was a lot of blowouts this week. Now, a game that you were at up at Stadium Field in Parkersburg on Friday, George Washington beat the Big Reds 38-7. I didn't expect much out of Parkersburg, but I certainly didn't expect this much out of GW. They came and they beat Huntington in the Gritorama last weekend at University of Charleston Stadium, and that kind of people started to perk up and say, "Oh man, GW might have a team this year." And then 38-7 against Parkersburg. I know Parkersburg's not Parkersburg like they have been, but still 38-7. Caleb Mackey had a really good game. I wasn't there, obviously. I was at the Nitro Poker game on Friday. You were there. What'd you see out of the Patriots?
Well, I saw a lot of good things, particularly on offense. They had, Nunu Miller ran for 188 yards. They also have Colton Rollison run for 100 yards. And I'm going to have to go back through some stats and everything. I'm not sure the last time GW had two running backs go over 100 yards in the same game. I don't know if Ryan Switzer and Dustin Krauser ever did it in the same game.
That would have been my guess.
That would have been my guess. Yeah. So I'm going to have to check that out. But, anytime you get two running backs going over 100, you're doing something right. They totaled about 590-ish, total yards. But you mentioned Caleb Mackey. He was 6 of 13 for 93 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then he got them a lead that enabled them to bring Grant Wells in, the freshman quarterback. And Grant Wells was 9 of 13 for 97 yards and a touchdown. They've got options at that position. And one of the quote-unquote sexiest things to ever talk about with football is the quarterback controversy, wherever it may be. I don't think that there's a quarterback controversy.
No, not at GW.
I think there's two solid quarterbacks here.
They've got a great backup, but
they've
Caleb
got a
Mackey's
great
the
backup.
Star. Yeah.
Yes. Their schedule, I think, is really conducive to Wells getting some snaps in the first half of the season, though. They go to Ashland Paul Blazer this week.
That's a really good team out of Kentucky this year.
And I can't remember the exact order off the top of my head, but they've got, Winfield, St. Albans, and Riverside on September 18th, which is their home opener, actually.
Wow, they're not home until then?
Yeah. Wow. So they have some opportunity to get to 4-1 at the very worst, I think, by my midseason. I hate to slap teams with losses weeks before we play when we're even, in the first week of the season. But GW is going to be favored heavily in every game but the Blazer game until midseason. That's going to allow Grant Wells, I think, to get some more snaps on the varsity level. But at the same time, it's going to allow Mackey to assert his control of that team.
Going out to the Eastern Panhandle, Martinsburg, they lost that state semifinal game against Capital last year, snapped their streak of four straight state titles in Class AAA. It's a tongue twister, hard to say. You mentioned this before we started recording. They lost to H.D. Woodson, a very good team out of Washington, D.C., 26-24. By all accounts, a good game. Martinsburg might be down by Martinsburg standards, but when was the last time they lost 2 games in a row?
I looked it up right before this. It was 2007. And that was actually the
8 years ago.
Yeah, really. That was the year that they beat Morgantown at the beginning of the season and had another win that they had to forfeit because the player they were using he was a transfer from Maryland. Turned out to be
vaguely
ineligible,
remember this, yeah.
and it was the forfeit that they gave Morgantown that allowed Morgantown to make the playoffs that year.
That's
it was a
right.
really
I forgot all
weird
about that.
thing. But Martinsburg lost its last regular season game that year to Jefferson, and then had to go on the road in the first round of the playoffs to play Bridgeport and lost that. That was the last time they'd won back-to-back games. Obviously, this is not back-to-back this season because it's week 1, but obviously Capital ended their season.
Yeah, they did win the
last
state
season.
title last year,
Right.
so they ended with a loss.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Coming back a little closer to home, Herbert Hoover beat Scott 39-12 in a Cardinal Conference game. I picked Scott in the Gridiron Gurus, and I started seeing the scores coming around, and I thought, wow, I may have vastly undervalued what Herbert Hoover can bring to the table this season.
Yeah, I agree. I had a lot of that same thinking. From the results of the Cardinal Conference Gridorama, which it should be noted,
It's
is
not
in the first week, and it's a controlled scrimmage kind of
it's
thing.
not a true scrimmage head-to-head like they do
Right.
at the MSAC grid. It's more of a practice
Exactly.
than anything.
And Hoover didn't, by all account, do fairly well in that grid. And I didn't know. They'd lost a good bit of their line. They had lost their top running back from last year. They'd lost their quarterback from last year. So I was kind of, Scott's not a bad program. So we're going with them. Both, Tom and I did. 39-12 is pretty emphatic, though.
Yeah.
I mean,
And they ran out, I think it was 21-0 before the end of the
Really?
first quarter. They ran out quick on them. And going back up to a northern panhandle this time, Huntington made a long trip north
Yeah.
to play Brooke. I believe that's a product of Princeton leaving the
Could have been.
MSAC. There's a lot of those AAA teams of the MSAC are going to have an odd game that'll stick out on the schedule. Trip to Brooke was that for Huntington this week. 17-13, the Highlanders beat Brooke, and on the surface you might think, oh, Huntington, what's wrong with Huntington? They only beat Brooke by 4, but this is classic Huntington the last few years. Defense carries them. The offense is, you're going to be scratching your head wondering why can't Huntington score more points than this. I believe getting tweet updates from Grant Traylor from the Herald-Dispatch, and that pretty much echoed that, is that the defense is a Billy Seals defense. They're going to do what they do, but offense, it's, like I said, same old Huntington.
Yeah, I mean, they got Deion Jackson, who, Huntington coach Billy Seals has talked about using here, there, and everywhere. And in the MSAC grid, he didn't play a single snap at quarterback, which is where he was playing at the end of last year and through the playoffs. So I'm not sure, not having seen film or anything of that game Friday night, what they were doing there. But obviously, I need to stop saying the word obviously for one. They make a long trip up to Wellsburg from Huntington. That's a haul.
Yeah.
And look, Brooke at home versus non-OVAC teams is usually pretty good. They haven't, they played in back-to-back state title games in 2009 and 2010. They're not that far removed from being one of the better AAA programs in the state. I don't know really if there's much of anything to make out of that final score.
Yeah.
Really. So we'll see with Huntington real soon when we have something down here to compare them by that we're more familiar with.
Next game on our list, Hurricane 27, Winfield 7. This game was close for a long time throughout. Hurricane kind of pulled away late. I believe Winfield actually got their 7 points at the end of the game, but it was 6-0, 7-0, something like that at halftime at least, I think. This I don't know what to make out of this. You and I have talked all throughout the year that maybe Winfield can get Hurricane now. They don't. Hurricane's not necessarily as pass happy, lighting up scoreboards like we've seen some Scott Tinsley offensive teams do in the past. They got the win, but I'm not really that sold on Hurricane just yet, and maybe Winfield might be a little less than what I was thinking coming in.
Yeah, maybe both.
Yeah.
Winfield's always going to have trouble with its line against MSAC teams. Even a program like Hurricane that is not historically thought of as a big physical kind of club.
They're not bruisers when you think about it.
Yeah, but the thing with Winfield is their two running backs, Isaac Withrow and Ethan Copeland, are both big power backs. And if you don't have the ability to break it to the outside, Hurricane does usually have that ability. So, 27-7, that seems about right from what we know now, but Yeah, I thought coming in that Winfield might be able to keep that a little bit closer. Maybe it's just that the Hurricane pulled away.
Could be. We've got 2 pages here. We'll hit the rest on this page just real quick, get some quick thoughts. John Marshall, 22, University 11. If you told me John Marshall was going to beat University, I would have been like, oh, okay. But it seemed like from what I was reading Friday night that they were in control of that game throughout. I didn't really see that coming. Yeah. Also, Kaiser 61, Petersburg 13. I'm not real sure what Petersburg's bringing to the table. But Kaiser seems like maybe they're back in the swing of things from that run they had 2 years ago, 3 years ago, where they were one of the best, if not outside of the Wayne and Bridgeports of the world, the best AA team in the state. Right. And Bluefield. Got a Bluefield shirt in the room. Don't want to offend anybody. We should mention Bluefield got the win in the Bluefield-Graham game, 28-21. And that's, again, I could never really tell much about Graham, but Bluefield seems like they're going to be Bluefield again this year.
I figure.
Another big one, Magnolia 40, Shadyside, Ohio 0. Was it 22 games?
32.
32. Shadyside hadn't lost a game in 3 years, 4 years, something like that, and Magnolia took them to the woodshed.
Yeah.
And they've got awesome new helmets, too, that look kind of like Navy's, only they've got the M on the side.
Yep.
We're helmet nerds around here. If you haven't listened or watched the podcast
I think most guys are. I think most football fans are helmet nerds.
Mm-hmm. More surprising scores. Oh, maybe not necessarily surprising, but ones that you take note of when you see them. Single A Man, 18. Triple A Logan, 13. I bet that was a wild night in Logan County on Friday.
It had to be. Yeah, I was a little bit surprised by that result, too. But, I thought Man had some people coming back. John Thomas Keffer is back. It's hard to tell, with Logan not being in the MSAC.
We don't get to see him as much.
Yeah, exactly. We don't get to see him as much, and it's really hard to tell what kind of team they are until if they happen to make the AAA playoffs. So it's difficult to tell. That's a good win for Man either way. Being a single A team, that helped their playoff
bunch of playoff
right
bonus
there.
Points right there.
That's 12 points right there.
Next game on the list, Mingo Central 59, Wyoming East 7. The Miners, I think, flexing some muscle, maybe showing people that, hey, Bridgeport's not the only team that can roll off wins in big wins in AA. Maybe don't just crown them just yet.
And we all know Yogi Kinder, and if he's going to have a chance to put
and if you don't, you really
60
should,
on the board.
Great.
Yeah. And if he has a chance to put close to 60 on the board,
he's gonna.
Yeah.
Oh, Yogi. Look forward to the playoff meeting. Get to see him. All right, on to our second page. The game I was at, Nitro 39, Poca 14. I looked this up last night. Nitro scored 39 points. It's only the 4th time this decade Nitro scored at least 30 points. I believe they've got Poca 2 years ago, and I forget the exact scores. Lincoln County several years ago, and Logan once. It was an interesting game in that there were 2 first-year coaches, Seth Ramsey from Poca and Bryce Casto from Nitro, although just on the surface, 2 first-year coaches. Bryce Casto, it was not his first game coaching high school football, so that's a younger guy. Casto was, in the athletic department at West Virginia State with the football team there for a long time, led South Charleston to that 1994 AAA state championship, beat a Randy Moss team from DuPont. He's been around the block a time or two with high school football, and, it was... seemed like both teams couldn't get out of their own way early. They traded turnovers, fumbles, things like that. Nitro was able to get some points. I believe it was 20-0. And one of their players, Chris Clark, broke his arm. Snapped it right in the middle of the field. Long delay. It was right there, maybe a minute and a half left in the second quarter. And he broke his arm on a 3rd down play. So Nitro's punting when they come back half an hour, 45 minutes later. Poca gets the ball, goes right down the field and scores. It's 20-7 at halftime. Momentum definitely had shifted at that point. Both teams kind of hemmed and hawed their way early in the 3rd quarter. Poca scores on a punt return touchdown, and that was a problem for Nitro all night was kick coverage.
Oh, really? Okay.
Poca almost took the opening kickoff all the way back. After Nitro's touchdowns that put them up early, Poca had good field position, it seemed, every time they got the ball because Nitro wasn't tackling anybody on the kick returns. They finally pop one in the 3rd quarter, 20-14, and then Nitro kind of turned it on. They may have been aided by an iffy personal foul penalty that preserved a drive when they went up. I believe it was 27-14. But after that, Austin Banks got the ball an awful lot, just rolled up a bunch of yards, ended up scoring 4 touchdowns, and the Wildcats got the win. The Nitro Poca game's a weird one because the teams have both been down lately.
Right.
I mean, there's no secret to that. They've both been down, and they're both proud football programs. So the fans and the coaches and the parents, they all expect a lot. I think both of these teams are going to have struggles going through this season, but it seems like, at least on the Nitro side, they're playing to their abilities. In the past few years with Derek Midkiff, when he was the coach, assistant at South Charleston now, Midkiff was a quarterback under Scott Tinsley at Nitro, and he tried to put that system in, and Nitro just didn't have the personnel to run it, and I thought the proof was in the records. What Casto's doing now is they're running the ball a lot. There's a lot of option. There's a lot of belly reads. There's a lot of pitch outs, and they're playing more to their strengths. Now, the record might not reflect it at the end of the year. If Friday's game was the only one Nitro wins, I wouldn't be completely shocked.
Right.
But they're going to, kind of like we were talking about with Riverside earlier, they're going to play better football this year.
Yeah, I spoke to Bryce Casto Saturday morning, as a matter of fact. As a matter of fact, Bryce Casto texted me Saturday morning and wanted to know when and where he could send us stats so we could keep track of this.
That's refreshing.
How awesome is that?
That's great.
Yes. But, and I congratulated him on getting off on the right foot and everything. And he said, thanks. And we've got a steep hill. What he said is, we've got a steep hill to climb, but the kids are giving me every bit of what they can, and that's all I'm going to ask of them. And it... One of those things, it sounds like a cliche, but at the same time, Bryce has been around long enough that he knows what reasonable expectations are. And he'll push his kids, and I think he'll get as much out of them as he can. And I think it's a step in the right direction for that program. I mean, you can't start charting an immediate path to the Super 6 with 1 year. But I think Nitro's on the road back eventually.
Oh, let's see. Next game on our list. Well, we'll stop real quick and just mention Payton City 20, Salineville, Southern Ohio 19. We were just talking about my alma mater in Nitro. We'll throw yours out there. Payton City getting a win to open the season. But the game we'll get into next, Parkersburg South 28, Ripley 0. Again, I didn't know what to expect out of Ripley with Eddie Smolder coming in from Sissonville. He's a Ripley alum. He's got that history there. He's a very good player when he was at Ripley. Parkersburg South, though, they've got Garrett Gilkerson back, who I hadn't seen play until the AAA playoffs last year when they lost to Capital. And he was the only player I saw all season catch Kayshawn Haley from behind. And I think it was his dad pointed out to me on the sideline. He's like, he's been doing it all year. And I was very impressed. Seemed like he had another great game Friday. Parkersburg South also has very cool helmets this year. I don't know if you've seen them.
I didn't see, no.
On one side of the helmet, they've got like a Patriot waving an American flag with the 76 in the middle, and then they've got the old South logo on the other side. So more helmet nerd chat for you helmet nerds out there. Parkersburg South, though, I mean, is this a team? They seem perennially they're going to get into the final 16. You're going to see them playing in November, but could this be a year they challenge and maybe get into that top 4, maybe upsets or things fall their way? That could be a team you see in Wheeling in December.
That's a dark horse. Yeah. They're not one of the ones that I would pick, honestly. But I think if you get into the final 8, if you can win that first round playoff game, anything can happen in 1 week. And I think we're in agreement, and a lot of people with us, that Garrett Gilkerson's one of the best all-around football players in the state.
He's one of the best athletes in the state. He's a great basketball player, too.
And anytime you have that kind of athlete, and as most know, Parkersburg South dropped out of the MSAC in 1998. They're not, playing that grinder schedule. Yeah. They're in the OVAC, and not to belittle that conference, but I think their schedule is a little easier of a path to the playoffs than, say, Parkersburg High's is.
Yeah.
So once they get in there, who knows? And I do think that they will be in the final 16.
No big shock here. Point Pleasant 62, Lincoln County 7. Poor Lincoln County. What can you say? It's just been a rough history of football since that school consolidated. Yep. The other side, Point Pleasant, though, didn't miss a beat. I kind of wondered with... every year you wonder with a team like Point Pleasant, like, okay, they were great in AA for a long time, and then you wonder, okay, they're going to AAA now. What's it going to be like? Well, they've been, with a lot due to not being in a conference and kind of getting to pick and choose who they're playing and where. They've racked up really impressive records. They've been deep into the AAA playoffs, but you've never really had the feeling that this is a team that's going to actually contend for a state title in AAA.
That's true.
Reclassification comes down soon. It's this fall.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
it'll be the end of November.
Yeah, Point Pleasant's one of the teams that they're one of the smallest AAA teams in the state, and you think, okay, maybe they'll go back down to AA. Nitro, another team that might be there on the border, but we talked about this a little bit with Parkersburg South. Is this the year maybe Point Pleasant gets into that Final Four? They've been a team that can get into the Final Eight the last couple of years, but can they maybe take that next step this year?
I think they could. I mean, because they play such
Dave Dart's a good coach.
Disciplined defense, and Dave Dart's is a great coach, and they've always got size on the line. Cody Mitchell is back for his senior year, and he's recovered from that injury. I think it was a broken collarbone. I think he suffered in the playoffs.
It was a Jefferson game last year. I was down there. That was not a good injury.
Yeah. I mean, they lost Aiden Yates at quarterback, so I think a lot of it is going to depend on who replaces him, how they come along. So they got a shot.
Yep. Here locally, the Class AAA runners-up last year, South Charleston, started kind of slow in their win against St. Albans. I think St. Albans jumped out 6-0 on them, and then it was 6-6 for a good bit of the first half after that. Third quarter, though, I think they scored 32 points in the third quarter. Final score ended up being 52-6 in favor of South Charleston. Reading some of the quotes from guys like Kentre Greer, quarterback, the House Award winner, is the state's top quarterback last year, and I believe he was the Gatorade Player of the Year last year, too. It seemed like they were just nerves got to them a little bit early in the season. First game of the year, they've got all these expectations coming off of that run to the title game of last year and all the individual expectations. But once they settled down, things started clicking, and they were South Charleston again. There's a big one coming up for them next week. I also wonder if maybe they saw what Capital did the night before, 50-0 against Riverside, and you want to go out and match that.
Right.
These are two teams that they've got a long history. They were chirping at each other at the MSAC grid. I wondered if the South Charleston players might have been looking ahead to next week's game against Capital a little bit before they realized, hey, we got to play St. Albans tonight.
I think difficult not to. As again, we've talked a lot about this before. These are high school kids.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, these are 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. They're not pros.
And St. Albans hasn't played really a meaningful game. Again, going back to Martinsburg, the last time they lost, it's the same season, 2007. St. Albans hasn't won more than 4 games in a season, but once. I mean, they went 4-6 in 2008, and have been 3-2 or 3-7, 2-8 since every year. So I think there's a little tendency to maybe look ahead a little bit, get down 6-0. Takes a while to get into the groove of things, but that's a typical result from South Charleston and St. Albans anymore.
Kentre Greer and Tyree Pratt, are those right now? Those are the two best quarterbacks in the state until somebody else maybe steps up and inserts himself in the conversation.
I would say so. I want to see,
especially in AAA.
Yeah, about Gilkison. I think he's more of an all-around kind of player. Somebody you're not going to say, oh, he's the best quarterback. But I would say they're 1 and 2.
Yeah, with Gilkison, it seemed like he was certainly capable and good on offense, but he impressed me on defense. Just flying around the field, like I said, he caught Kayshawn Haley from behind, and he was the only guy I saw do that last year. Next thing we'll talk about maybe the surprise of the season in Week 1. Tulsa 49, Wayne 34. The Pioneers have lots and lots of very good things in their recent history. State title game appearances, all-state kind of guys. I believe it had been 9 years since Tulsa had beat them. They're Wayne County rivals, and the Rebels just seemed like they had Wayne's number all night on Friday. I think Wayne jumped out early on them, but Tulsa weathered that storm. In years past, Wayne jumps on you, not if you're just Tulsa, but anybody, and then it kind of snowballs from there. But Tulsa didn't flinch. They took that punch to the face, I guess the cliche would be, to open that game. I peeked at Tulsa's schedule. Of course, they're Cardinal Conference team. They've got the Mingo Centrals and all of the world to deal with. But maybe outside of that, is just going off this result, Tulsa could very well be a 2, 3, 4 seed in the playoffs. They could end up running the table, maybe losing one game, and I didn't see that coming at all.
No, not at all. I mean, you're talking about 9 years. That's 2006. That's the B.J. Evans year.
Yeah.
And when they played for the state title.
Tulsa and Wayne played in the state championship
and
game.
I think Tulsa beat them in the regular season. It's really unforeseen. Okay, I'm not going to say weird or whatever, but I mean it's really unforeseen. Tulsa's been down, a lot lately, and I I saw a tweet somewhere. They must have been in the third quarter, or whatever, and it said Wayne is in deep trouble, and I was like, "What? You know, no, seriously." But before we project Tulsa as a top 4 or 5 team, I think we really need to look more at what is Wayne right now. They lost Grant Ferguson, who was a 4-year starter, and I think 3-year All-Stater. They lost Mason Hodge, who was a 4-year starter.
One of my favorite high school players ever. That kid was just football. He was look him up in the dictionary. Wayne football was Mason Hodge right next to it.
And not only their statistical, output, but what those two guys meant to that program, as far as just everybody moving ahead as a unit all the time. You got to find new leaders. I just think that Wayne is at a vulnerable spot for its program and how long it's been dominating lately. And I thought that they would take a not just a little, but a considerable step back this year. Maybe that result is indicative of that. Maybe Tulsa's really good. Maybe, and much more likely, it's kind of a mixture midway of the two. Yeah. So,
backing up for just a second, a score I didn't have highlighted on here, but definitely bears mentioning. Spring Mills 31, Musselman 0. Kind of like the, I forget which game it was earlier, John Marshall University. If you told me Spring Mills won the game, I'd be like, oh, okay. But they just put one on Musselman. I think it was, combined score the last 2 years of those games was something like 70-14 in favor of Musselman.
Yeah.
Spring Mills, the newest school in the state, it seems like they might have, found their way a little bit with football. Particularly the consolidated schools, sometimes it takes them a couple years to get going. It seemed like now's that time.
Yeah,
for Spring Mills.
Third year of existence, and we all have to keep in mind this is a school that was sliced out of parts of Martinsburg and Hedgesville. You think they got a few football players at Martinsburg that came out of that? Yeah, they've been playing together. This is their third year now, and 31-0 is a surprise, big time. But I don't know if Spring Mills is a playoff team yet, but.
They've got my attention.
Yeah, we're looking. Now you've got our attention.
Another sort of, again, not necessarily a surprising end result, but the score, Wahama 42, Ravenswood 0. The White Falcons are 3 years removed from Class A state title. They're all running together for me right now. But this has been one of the better Class A programs this decade. Yeah. I picked Ravenswood.
So did I.
And, again, that was just right or wrong based on this was a pretty good AA team the last few years. Not really sure what Wahama has coming back. They're a single A team. These things, we talk about things being cyclical with teams. With single A teams, you see that a lot more just because there's not as many kids to pull from. You're talking about teams that sometimes have only 20 kids on the roster. I definitely didn't see 42-0 coming.
No.
White Falcons maybe another year where they're making a run in Class A. Let's see. Going back out to the Eastern Panhandle, Washington 59, Hedgesville 0. Washington, another new school.
Yeah,
or newer school. They're not quite as new as
now.
Spring Mills, but I mean, is this just a really good Washington team or a really bad Hedgesville team, or a little bit of both, maybe?
Hedgesville, a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Hedgesville's had a hard time, lately, but Washington made the playoffs a couple years ago, year before last, and came down to Cabell Midland, I believe, and gave them a run for a while, but Midland pulled away, and then Washington had a kind of a rebuilding year last year.
Last game we'll get into from week 1. It's a Saturday game. Buffalo 53, Parkersburg Catholic 20. Buffalo is one of those teams, kind of like we talked about with Spring Valley earlier. It seems like every other year Buffalo gets something going and they make a run and end up going pretty deep in the Class A playoffs. But just basing off this result and knowing what they have back from that team, they would believe 9-3 last year.
Ooh, I thought they lost 2. So
okay, apologies if I got that wrong. But Buffalo was
10-2, I think.
Yeah, Buffalo was good last year. They've got some kids coming back from that. They lost their running back, but they've got pretty good replacement this year, don't they?
Dylan Ramsey really, by the time the playoffs rolled around last year, and he's a junior now, he played like a slot back utility guy. He was a return guy last year too, but is more than talented enough to move into that role left by Jordan Tucker. Okay. Ethan Burgess, the sophomore quarterback, looked really good last year as for a freshman. And I think looking at Buffalo's schedule, they could conceivably go 8-2, 9-1 this season.
All right, that'll handle everything from last week. We'll look ahead real quick at some of the games coming up this week. Then we'll get in and we'll break out the first WVHuddle.com player of the week to wrap things up. Just going through our list here, it ought to be in big bold letters with neon signs around it. Capital at South Charleston. These are teams that we mentioned earlier don't like each other. They've got a long history. These kids have been playing against each other since they were 4 or 5 years old.
Right.
Some of them have gone back and forth between the two schools, middle school and elementary school. Played for the AAA title last year. Capital and South Charleston with these two quarterbacks, Kentre Greer and Tyree Pratt, just seemed tied together. It was their freshman year when Kentre came in at halftime, led South Charleston on that big comeback at UC Stadium. They ended up winning the game. It's been a treat to get to watch these guys go head-to-head, and there haven't been a whole lot of, particularly South Charleston Capital, but anywhere you see two quarterbacks of this caliber that will have played against each other 4 times. We're getting short on time, so we won't get into that too much. But if you're going to a game this week, or if you're only going to one game this year,
that ought to be the one.
Maybe go to that one and get there early because traffic's going to be bad. Let's see, what else do we have here? Just flipping through the list. Man at Mount View. Man got that win last week. Mount View going 50-0 over Riverview. That was a surprise. They hadn't won a game in a while. Let's see what else we have here. Mingo Central at Tulsa. Mentioned that a little bit earlier.
Certainly that's an important game.
Yeah. GW at Ashland Paul Blazer. We talked about that. Ashland's got, I believe their running back's going to Marshall. He's the Kentucky State 100 and 200 meter champion. They've also got a linebacker going to Western Kentucky. So there's some talent in that Ashland Paul Blazer team. Martinsburg looks to avoid the 0-2 start going to Shenandoah, Virginia. That's also a team that's pretty good usually. Oh, let's see. Nitro at Hurricane. We'll see what Nitro can do against a little better competition than Polka. Let's see. Sissonville at Wayne. Another interesting game in the Cardinal Conference. One of those teams is going to end up being 0-2. And we didn't get into it much with Sissonville losing that game to Chapmanville last week. But I didn't see that one coming.
Can I point out something
Sure.
with this real quick? There's 2 games with Cardinal Conference and that stand out. That Sissonville Wayne game, but also Chapmanville goes to Hoover. Okay, so one of these, Chapmanville or Hoover, is going to be 2-0 and 2-0 in the conference, and either Sissonville or Wayne is going to be 0-2. I mean, that combination of those 2 games is going to go a long way, I think, in determining who wins the Cardinal Conference in week 2.
Yeah. Another, I don't want to say Cabell County rivalry. Spring Valley's not in Cabell County, but I tend to lump Cabell Middle and Huntington Spring Valley together as the big schools down in that area. Spring Valley visits Huntington this week. Be interesting to see. St. Albans at Riverside. Someone's going to get a win there. Talking with Zach Davis after the game last week, he was like, "Hey, we can get these guys. We can win a game," and that's particularly for a new coach with a team that has been bad for a while.
Right.
Getting that first win is a big step. So we'll see if Riverside can do that when they host St. Albans on Friday. And Wheeling Park at Bridgeport. That's another.
the other big one.
If you're up north and you can't get down to South Charleston Capital, that might be the one to go to. Wheeling Park's one of the best teams in AAA. Bridgeport, obviously, you don't need to go over what Bridgeport's resume has been recently. Any other games I've missed here that have jumped out to you?
No, I was looking at the Wheeling Park Bridgeport game is an obvious one. Moorfield at Pocahontas County. Pocahontas got a real big win over Tucker County in week 1. So those Eastern West Virginia single A's, I think that's going to go a long way in determining who's, for real and a threat out of that area, even though Pocahontas is more southern. Other than that, week 2, I don't think there's as many big games as there were in week 1, but there are some out there.
Yeah. So. Last year, if you guys are familiar, we would occasionally go over, who we thought might be front runners or contenders for awards. Not going to do that this week. I'm reserving judgment on who I think the Kennedy front runner is until I see that Capital South Charleston game, because I think it's, if you had to poll me right now, I'd say Tyree Pratt or Kentre Greer, but we'll see what happens on Friday. But last thing we'll do here today, we'll wrap up with the first WVHuddle.com Player of the Week for 2015. We could have gone a couple ways with this, but we chose Austin Banks, the junior running back from Nitro. Had 29 carries for 185 yards and 4 touchdowns in Nitro's 39-14 win against Poca, and that's, Nitro's not going to get that out of him every week, but it seems like, they lost Braden Underwood. He transferred to South Charleston. They've had some other guys graduate that they've given the ball to a lot recently. It seems like Banks might be the kid that steps up, and, if Nitro's going to be successful, he's going to have some games where he's running the ball 30 times for 180 yards or so.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Anything else you want to add? We can wrap that up.
No, I'm good.
Feeling good after 1 week?
Yeah, the energy starts, flowing.
Yeah,
the thing that I'm excited about is from Thursday through Saturday, we covered 20 different schools in this state firsthand. Not call-ins, but we had guys see 20 different. That's almost a fifth of the state.
Yeah, we had bylines in Huntington, in Fairmont, in Bridgeport, in Charleston, and we were Parkersburg, several in Parkersburg.
Fairmont, Buchanan. Yeah. I was really happy with that. It really got me excited for this season, so I'm ready to roll now.
All right, sounds good. We'll wrap that up there, guys. If you're still looking at our ugly mugs, then bless you for sticking around this long. And you can find all of our high school coverage on WVHuddle.com. You can follow us on Twitter at WVHuddle, and we're going crazy with social media this year. We're on Instagram at WVHuddle. Sometimes I'll get out of games. I'll be periscoping on the sidelines, giving you updates. You can find those links there. Derek Taylor's at It's Really DT on Twitter. You can follow him there. And I believe that's all we've got. So thanks for listening and watching, and we'll check back in with you next week. See you next week.